Okay, and here we go. Hi, everybody. Chuck Holton here, coming to you live from the Lodge in West Virginia on CBN's YouTube channel. We're talking about, well, Russia's economic prospects for 2025 not looking good. And the United States prospects look much better. We're going to compare and contrast a little bit and kind of help you understand how, how if you think about the war in Israel, the attack on October 7th harmed Israel terribly. Obviously, more than 1,000 people lost their lives, people were taken hostage, et cetera, et cetera. It has led to a protracted year, more than 1 year war, uh, and obviously has harmed the Israeli economy. It's been difficult for them in the public sphere, fighting the information war against uh, media that is definitely not on their side, et cetera, et cetera. However, if you look at the losses that have been taken by, say, the Palestinians, the Gaza is a big parking lot at this point, and obviously it hasn't been good for anybody that's related to Hamas in any way, shape, or form, correct? It hasn't been real good for Lebanon or Hezbollah. They've taken every senior leader out of Hezbollah off their organization, created a lot of upward mobility, if you want to put it that way, inside that organization. It's not been good for the economy of Lebanon. We went to Jordan on our tour in October, and all of the hot zonians, the people from my Hot Zone podcast that went along on our tour, got to see firsthand just how bad the tourism has gotten in Jordan when we went to Petra and that sort of thing. It was just really, really bad. And all of that is just a shadow of what it's done to other Arab countries or Muslim countries, even up to and including Turkey and Saudi Arabia. It hasn't been good for anybody. And if you added up the aggregate losses in terms of people, for sure, and in terms of finances, without a doubt, Israel comes out on top. I mean, the other countries have lost far more. Palestinians have lost a lot more people. They've seen their government toppled, their houses destroyed. It's just so one-sided, and that is typical how wars go with Israel. Israel doesn't start wars, but they sure do know how to finish them. And when they do, they've never lost one yet. Trying to keep my voice from going out here. I've been struggling with a cold for a few days. So in the same way that the aggressor in the war in Israel, that is Hamas, has suffered an outsized cost to Israel. And that's not in any way belittling the tragedy of October 7th and what it's done to the families and the people that have lost loved ones in the war in Israel, the families that are not able to go back to their homes yet, and all of that. That's not to make light of that at all. But in absolute terms, it's been a less than 10% cost on the economy of Israel, while it's been almost a 100% cost on the economy of uh, Gaza. And it's been a massive cost in lives. Israel has lost something like 1,600 plus or minus people total since October 7th. And even by Israel's measure, they've taken out more than 12,000 fighters, uh, something like maybe up to 17,000. So many more people have lost their lives on the Palestinian side, et cetera, et cetera. I'm making a comparison between that and what's happening with Russia. Russia aggressed against its neighbor, Ukraine, in February 2022. I was there 3 weeks before that started, and I've been there. I just came back from Ukraine this last week. So I wanted to kind of give you a little bit about what I've seen. And obviously, it's been extremely harmful to Ukraine and their economy. But Ukraine has gotten a lot of help from the world at large, whereas the Russians have gotten 40 rounds of sanctions from the world at large. And so it's had a massive effect on the Russian economy. The Ukrainian economy, say what you will, the malls are still open, even in Kharkiv. We went to the mall. Kharkiv is pretty close to the front line. Um, and people are still shopping. Again, look, it's hurting Ukraine. They've lost a lot of people, probably over 60,000 total people killed, both soldiers and civilians. They have lost about 20% of their territory, and uh, it's taking upwards of 40% of their government's budget running the war, and that obviously is very, very expensive and not sustainable unless they get help from the world. However, Russia has lost far more people, uh, killed, wounded, and captured, probably upwards of 500,000. Some people say up to 750,000 at this point. The really weird thing in this war is that usually in war, if you have let's say 10,000 people die, you'll have 30,000 people wounded. It's a 3-to-1 ratio normally in war. But for Russia, and it is that pretty much that ratio in Ukraine. I was out on the front line a week ago and saw with my own eyes. That is the ratio that they're facing in Ukraine. However, the Russians basically don't treat their wounded hardly at all. They just leave them. There's even videos out there that are horrific of Russians just offing their own guys. When a guy gets injured, there's a video out there I saw recently of a squad that was running across a field, and a FPV kamikaze drone came flying in and hit one of the Russian soldiers and wounded him. And he was down on the ground. And the next soldier behind him never even slowed down, just ran right by him and went pow and just capped him right in the head, kept on running, just put him out of his misery. So what that means is that Russia's combat deaths in this war are actually uh, as high or higher, perhaps, than their number of wounded, which is horrific. That's really bad. However, so far, Russia has been able to sort of hide the consequences of this war pretty well from most of its people, especially those that live in the big cities. It was recruiting, has been recruiting heavily. I got to plug my computer in here. It's been recruiting heavily in the cities, billboards and such, offering big bonuses up to $50,000 to join the Russian military. But they're running out of men, and that's evidenced by the fact that they are bringing in North Korean troops, more than 10,000 of them already, and with plans perhaps to bring up to 100,000 North Korean troops to do their fighting. And they are starting to show up on the front lines. They usually show up either very poorly trained or dead uh, on the front lines. There have been several videos, even just in the last day, that have come out. One was shared by Vladimir Zelensky himself on X, that showed North Korean troops in the field. We know they're poorly trained because there have been several instances of friendly fire where they ended up killing other Russian troops. And there are just lots of evidence showing up that these guys really don't have what it takes. They don't have any combat experience. They have very little training. They're probably not highly motivated. And the other thing that we're seeing is that they are not being apparently North Korea does never expects them to come home. Um, I can't even I have to be careful about even describing what the Russians are doing to the North Koreans who lose their lives on the field of battle. Let's just say that they are not treating them with respect. They are doing what they can to make them unrecognizable, uh, so that it's harder for intelligence estimates to be made of how many North Koreans are dying on the front lines. That's the best way I can describe that. So all of that, I mean, look, if you've got to tap your buddies in North Korea to do your fighting for you, things are not going well. It's not like they're saving their stormtroopers for a rainy day. It's the rainy day is done, come and gone, and they've gone through their best troops, and they've gone through their next to best troops, and they've gone through the next level of troops, and they've gone through their ordinary troops, and they're down to now older men, young men, and mercenaries. And so it's starting to look like Germany in like 1917, which had already suffered under 3 years of a blockade by the West and was to the point where they just couldn't continue fighting, and they were about to lose World War I. So let's go through some of many of you don't know, but I was a stockbroker for 10 years. And so I kind of cut my teeth in the research realm, looking at spreadsheets and uh, profit and loss statements and things like that economically. And that comes in handy sometimes when trying to get a better handle on the news and what's going on with the news, and how to really understand what's happening. Okay. So I want to just go through some things here with you about Russia's economic prospects for 2025. And first of all, yeah, we know that they're under sanctions. They continue to pass more rounds of sanctions on Russia, and this has really crippled their access to global financial markets. I'll give you a great anecdote about that. When I go to Armenia, which I do several times a year, Armenia, by and large, still operates on the Russian financial system, but that's changing. What I mean is, if you go there to get a uh, ride share service, you don't go to Uber. You pull up an app called Yandex. Yandex is the Russian version of Uber. And I used to be able to put in my credit card, take a taxi ride, and then pay with my credit card when I got out. My credit card won't work with Yandex anymore because Yandex is on the Russian system. My credit card's on the Swift system, the Western system, and the two systems don't mesh anymore. There are many places in Russia, I'm sorry, in Ukraine, yes, in Ukraine and in Armenia, where my credit cards won't work. Because, for example, last week when I was in Kramatorsk on the eastern border near the front line, that's actually in Donetsk province, and Donetsk has been mostly taken over by Russia. So for some reason, Western credit cards won't work in Donetsk province, in that Donbass region anymore. Uh, these kinds of things are minor irritations for somebody like me, but they're major problems for Russia when so much of their economy would normally come from export, typically the export of oil and gas. So that's the next point. Russia is very dependent on oil and gas revenues. And several things have happened in concert that have made those oil and gas revenues just plummet, just plummet. Now, I'm curious as to how many of you uh, keep track of the price of oil. Without Googling it, can any of you tell me the about, more or less, the current price of a barrel of oil? Just put it in the chat over there. What did I do with my chat? I lost my chat. There it is. Arnold Floyd says, I watched videos of about 50 North Korean soldiers running out through a field with no cover to turn around and make it back to somewhere safer and not make it. Yeah, they're just very, very poorly trained. All the videos that I'm seeing on Telegram and stuff of North Korean soldiers, being a soldier myself, just make you cringe. Adam Forbes got it about right. Phoenix Rising got it about right. Moon says $3. That's more like the price of a gallon of gas. I mean more the price of a barrel of oil. A barrel of crude, of course, there are lots of different kinds. There's sweet, there's light, there's Brent, there's, all different sorts. But a barrel of crude oil right now is about $75. Of course, it fluctuates every day. And actually, it's made it all the way down. Now, Russian oil is quite a bit cheaper than that. And so I have somewhere here, a graph of the oil price. I'm going to show you. This is Brent crude, US dollar per barrel. And this goes back to about the beginning of the war in Ukraine. So at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, it was over $100 a barrel. Now it's down to about 60. So this is actually this is not completely up to date. It's back up to about 70-ish, 70 something. But the bottom line is, you see how that if Russia gets 40 to 50% of its government budget from the sale of oil, the price of oil has dropped by about 40% since the war started. And that has made it much more difficult for Russia, because Russia has to sell their oil now. They can't sell it to the West by and large. There's one pipeline that still goes to Germany because Germany was stupid and got rid of all of its other power generation capability, believing falsely that they were going to just live on prairie dust and, well, I mean, I don't know, that they thought they were going to live on our alternative sources of energy. As it turns out, you really can't make enough energy with alternative sources yet to live on for Germany or any other country. And so Germany still buys some oil from Russia, but that's very little. Most of Russia's oil now gets sold to India and China. And those two countries drive a real hard bargain. And so they have to sell it to those countries at about a 30% discount over market price. So if it's 75 for everybody else, then it's below 60 for Russia. And this is a real hit to Russia because they just are having a hard time funding the war with their oil revenues. Now, these prices are projected to stay low throughout 2025 and all the way into 2026. As a matter of fact, it could get down to $50 a barrel after 2025, that from what I'm seeing. And that would be real good for you and me at the pump. It would be good for the American economy, but it would be bad for the Russian economy. America's economy runs on oil, petroleum. Russia's depends on it for their income. So on top of that, there are other things that the sanctions are doing to reduce Russia's ability to make money. But even if they weren't, Russia would still be in a bad way. Now, there are also some labor issues going on. So right now, Russia is at very, very low unemployment, about 2%. And the problem is it's a false economy, because about 30% of the Russian economy now is, about 30% of the Russian budget goes to their defense. 30% is higher than any other country in the world except for Ukraine right now. By contrast, the United States spends about 4% of its GDP on its military. Most countries in Europe are spending 2.5 or so, if they're lucky. And Russia's spending 30+% of its GDP on, of its government budget on the military. It's just not sustainable. Everybody is employed because they're either in the army fighting in Ukraine, or they're working in a factory building things to send to the people who are fighting in Ukraine. But what that does is it cannibalizes the real productive part of the economy. So producing war materiel that you're going to send to the front lines and then destroy by blowing it up, whether that's a missile or an artillery shell or a bullet or a tank, is a net loss. It's a 1-for-1 loss. You make one artillery shell, you lose one artillery shell, right? You're not creating wealth that way long term. The things that create wealth are things that are making the world a better place, that are improving productivity for people around the world. Whether that's a dishwasher that makes it easier and quicker to do the dishes, or it's a piece of software like Uber, or it's an iPhone or whatever. The things that drive an economy into growth, true growth, are the things that lead to human flourishing. War, obviously, is the antithesis of human flourishing, and it's just a big waste. So they have this massive brain drain of workers that are working to build things that are going to go get blown up. And on top of that, 800,000 Russians have fled the country, most of whom worked in the tech sector, creating things that actually, were good for the world. All of those things are leading to massive labor shortages. And by the way, losing 1,000 to 2,000 troops a day on the front line in Ukraine doesn't help either. It's just not sustainable. So on top of all that, they have more than 600,000 jobs that they just can't fill in Russia right now. And that's a very bad place for their economy to be. On top of that, their population decline, they're not having babies. Their replacement rate is like 0.9, and it needs to be 2.1 to just replace themselves. So their war economy is just cannibalizing resources from other sectors, and that leads to neglect of anything that's not military related. So you're finding trains breaking down. They don't have the parts to fix them. You're finding delayed maintenance at, businesses and government buildings and everything all over the country. Businesses are going bankrupt. There are shopping malls across the country in Russia that are going out of business. We just saw video today of 2 oil tankers in the Black Sea that broke apart because they're using these oil tankers that are more than 50 years old, and they got in a little bit of rough seas. They weren't even that bad, and 2 of them just snapped in half. So there's massive environmental damage now in the Black Sea because of that. And on top of that, you have some sort of inherent political instability in uh, in Russia that basically people don't know what's going to happen. And when people don't know what's going to happen, they're not going to be investing anytime soon in anything. They're going to keep their money close to the chest. The key interest rate in Russia, does anybody know? You guys, let me know. Do you have any idea what the Fed funds rate is in the United States right now? What's the uh, federal interest rate right now in the U.S.? Anybody know? Put that in the chat box. Uh, just take a guess. Take a wild guess. What's the current? Arnold Floyd says 3. I'm going to let some people. I'm going to get on there and make a guess. What? Put in your guess. U.S. interest rate. They've been cutting the interest rates. I'll give you a little hint. Yeah, it's been in the news today because they just lowered it. Yeah, it's down to, okay, Savannah REI got it, 4.25. Okay, so it was above 5, and now it's down to 4.25. Thank you for guessing. 4.25 is still relatively high. Obviously, if you've tried to buy a house anytime in the last couple of years, you're going to be choking on the interest rate they're going to want to charge you, because it'll be, 6-7% perhaps. I wonder what you all got your interest rates for on your house. I know the last time I had a mortgage, I think our interest rate was 3.7%, and I thought that was terrible. But interest rates are coming down in the United States, which is a good thing. Oh, that was how many oil tankers? Okay, it was 3 oil tankers that broke up, Arnold Floyd says. The the Fed funds rate in the United States obviously is going to be the kind of the basis where they start from to determine the rate that they charge you on your mortgage. If you've had your mortgage for more than 5 years, you're probably doing pretty good, because unless it was a variable rate mortgage, you're you're not going to see, you won't be feeling the huge spike they had in interest rates during the Biden administration. And that a lot of that came from bad policy on the part of Joe Biden, and a lot of it came from just COVID. Sorry, I said that word. I hope they don't kick me off of YouTube for saying it. Yeah, I mean the 2020, the the amount of money the government spent to try to jumpstart the economy, we knew that was going to lead to massive inflation, and so you can't really blame that on Joe Biden. You could blame it. You can't really blame it uh, on Donald Trump either. It's just kind of what you had to do to keep the economy moving, because the economy would have collapsed if they hadn't done something like that. So all of that to say, we're sitting here about 4.75% in our Fed funds rate, our key interest rate. Russia just raised theirs again to 23%. 23%. That would mean that a mortgage would be 30% interest. So that's like putting a house on a credit card. I mean, Russia's interest rate is so high that it is like, imagine nobody can borrow money. Like, what could you do? But they feel like they have to raise the interest rate that high because otherwise the economy is just so overheated, it's just going to melt down. So, yeah, I mean, massive problems. And here's the problem that they face. They're kind of darned if you do and darned if you don't in Russia right now. Because if the war stopped tomorrow, the Russian economy is just going to fall off a cliff because you're going to have all of those people working in the military uh, sphere out of work, all those people in the military sent back home, and you're going to have a whole lot of unemployed people. Unemployment will go through the roof. Unemployment, when it's high like that, usually leads to unrest because people can't pay their bills. Unrest leads to regime change. And that's the one thing that Vladimir Putin he cannot abide, regime change. He's got to stay in power. And so he's going to do whatever he can to stay in power. Right now, that means feeding tens of thousands of young men every month into the war machine. And what we expect Donald Trump to do is to come in and issue an ultimatum to say to Ukraine, you're going to give up some territory, and to say to Russia, you're going to stop fighting. You're going to stop the war and leave. The Ukrainians told me when I was there last week, I actually had the president's advisor told me to my face, we will accept whatever Donald Trump comes up with in terms of demands for a ceasefire. We will go with whatever Donald Trump says. However, Russia really can't afford, I mean, Russia really should do that, but Vladimir Putin can't afford to do that. He cannot afford to accept the ultimatum that Trump will offer him, because stopping the fighting means regime change. I mean, that's just, you go follow the bouncing ball. That's what they get. The Ukrainians are not going to give up anything permanently. That their idea is they're going to have to, diplomatically seek restitution for the losses they've taken, for the territory that they've lost. And likely, it's likely that war will not actually be over. If Putin did accept the ceasefire agreement and pulled his troops out, that fight's going to start back up at some point in 5 years or maybe more. Because A, Ukraine wants its land back, and B, Russia is likely going to continue to get weaker as time goes on, because of the issues that I've already brought up, the demographic issues, the economic issues, the fossil fuel issues, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be, Russia is not looking at a bright future. One of the best things that they could hope to get if they were to win the war and actually take over Ukraine would be to assimilate 47 million more people into their economy, because their demographics look so bad that they can't even breed their way out of this. Right now, let's look by way of contrast at what the United States is looking at in the next couple of years. First of all, under economic growth, whereas Russia is stagnant or declining, their growth has been very weak the last couple of years and probably will be negative this year. The United States is projecting growth around 2 to 3%, which is fine for an economy our size. That's good. The impact of sanctions on Russia have been severe. The impact of sanctions on the United States has been, well, there's certain vodkas we can't buy anymore, and very, very little that we really, really need from Russia. Now, the sanctions impact has been bigger on Western Europe because of the inability to get the fuel that they need, but they are finding ways around that. And interestingly enough, the ways they're finding around that are not from alternative energy sources. They're actually restarting coal-fired power plants and things like that. So the labor market in Russia is shrinking and is mostly, by and large, unskilled. The labor market in the United States is pretty tight, but we're innovative and we can roll with that real well. And we're getting a lot of influx into our country by illegal immigrants who are taking the jobs, which are, that people say, well, they take the jobs Americans don't want. I don't believe that. I think Americans want those jobs, but if they can't get them, they'll be forced to try to get better education and go for a higher paying jobs. So it almost forces them to move up in the strata economically. The energy sector, Russia is looking at hugely declining revenues. If oil prices go down $5 a barrel next year, which they could go down double that easily, Russia would be looking at a contraction of its government revenue of about $36 billion, which is like 7.5% of their economy. That's huge. I mean, that's massive. And that's just a $5 drop in the price of oil. And we could see double that this coming year. The United States energy sector is stable, it's diversified, and we are very shortly will be self-sufficient in terms of energy. The tech sector in Russia has been crushed by sanctions and out-migration of their, let's say, just say brain drain. Their smartest and brightest are leaving the country. The United States tech innovation is still thriving. Now, here's the last point that really brings home how bad it's about to get for Russia. And it doesn't, sorry, we don't have to look at Russia. We have to look at the Middle East and Africa to see this. So, as you know, Syria just collapsed and was taken over by rebel groups who originated in a town called Idlib in the northern part of the country. I have a map here I can show you. No, I don't have a map I can show you. I have to go over here and get off that article and pull up my map. And then I'll show you, let's say Idlib, Syria. All right, here's my map. And this is Idlib in kind of northwestern Syria, right? The rebels that just took over Syria came out of Idlib. And guess who just spent the last 10 years bombing Idlib? The Russians did. And the people who now control most of Syria, they don't want to have anything to do with the Russians. They just want the Russians to die. They want them to die. They want them to go away. And so Russia has a whole bunch of ships down here in Tartus and some up here at Latakia, these two ports. And these are the best ships that Russia has left in its navy. Russia's navy is a absolute fraction of what the United States Navy is. And their navy is barely expeditionary. meaning it can barely get to other countries. And the best ships they have are in Tartus. The best ones in their Navy are in these two cities, Tartus and Latakia. Right now, what we're seeing is Russia trying to move its troops. They had about 4,000 troops in Syria, and they used those two naval bases not just to support those 4,000 troops in Syria, but to move supplies down into Africa, where they are heavily engaged in Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Niger, Chad, the Central African Republic, right here. Okay, and other countries too. But Russia has a big presence down there, several thousand troops also. And all the supplies for those troops went through this base in Syria. Well, if they lose these two bases in Syria, first of all, where are they going to take their ships? They got two choices. One is to go all the way out here across the Mediterranean, around, and take them past all these unfriendly countries, unfriendly to Russia right now: Spain, Portugal, France, UK, Germany, Denmark, Norway, and go all the way around to Novorossiysk, way up here in the north. Problem with that is even Russia's best ships cannot make that trip in one go without pulling over and stopping for gas someplace. If anywhere in there, if they stop, they're getting their ships confiscated because of the sanctions and the war in Ukraine. So their ships can't make that trip. They probably would sink along the way. I mean, they're not that great of ships. Russia's ships kind of are not really that great. The other option would be to go through this straits here at Istanbul, right? And go into the Black Sea. The problem is there with that is that there is a treaty that Istanbul oversees, that Turkey oversees, that says that military ships in a time of war cannot go through those straits. And Turkey, despite being sort of on this against the United States, against Western Europe, they are still part of NATO, and they don't like Russia. And so Russia might have to make a deal with Turkey that would be very costly for Russia. It would not be a good deal for Russia just to get their ships back. In order to do that, they're going to have to, all of this is going to have to take place before Donald Trump takes office. And it very well could be that Russia ends up just losing all of the equipment and ships and maybe even men that it's got in Syria right now, because they can't go through Israel, they can't go through Lebanon, they can't go through Jordan, they can't go through Iraq, they can't go through Turkey. The only way they can get their troops out is by sea. And if they have no place to take their troops and they're afraid their ships are going to get confiscated, they may be stuck, just stuck. But on top of being stuck, they also are no longer going to be able to supply their troops in Africa. And they're in a bad way. Those guys may be walking home. And so all of that to say, as Russia, as we come up to Donald Trump sitting down with Putin and Zelensky, which they probably won't sit down with those two, actually, they'll sit down with representatives. Russia is approaching this from a severe position of weakness. And the more you look at the numbers in Russia, the worse it looks. I mean, Russia is in a bad way. And it just got a whole lot worse over the last week because of what happened in Syria. So Syria may actually end up being the straw that breaks the camel's back for Russia, and not what's happening in Ukraine. But what just happened in Syria might very well lead to the end of the war in Ukraine, and an ending that is quite a bit more amenable to Ukraine. And that is why, if you remember hearing about the fact that Ukraine actually sent some of its troops, just a few advisors, and drone technology to the rebels in Syria, that's why. Ukraine is playing 4D chess here, taking a page from Israel, and that bodes very poorly for Russia and well for the war in Ukraine. Now, I'm interested to hear what you think about this. We've got about 500 people online. Please make sure you hit the like button, everybody, and let YouTube know more people need to be watching this content. If you are, I want to hear your comments. I want you to tell me what you think about this. Do you think that the war will be over between Ukraine and Russia in 2025? Brian says Russia is also losing tanks and armored vehicles at a staggering speed. That's right, they are. They are. They have ramped up production of tanks 24/7. They are cranking out new tanks in Russia. However, they can't get the chips that they need to make them as high tech as they once could. So get this. One of the reasons China wants Taiwan is because Taiwan makes the best chips in the world. And when you're talking about artificial intelligence and all the really high tech stuff, like even that you would see in an iPhone 16, something like that, it takes very high tech chips. And so Taiwan is making chips at the like 4 nanometer size. The way you measure how high tech a chip is by the nanometer size, right? And China, the best they can do is maybe 4 times bigger than that. It's 16 or even larger, I believe. I'm not exactly sure what size China can make, but I know it's way bigger than that. And so, if you say like Taiwan's chips can go to build an iPhone, China's chips could go to build maybe a transistor radio or something. I mean, it's not, I'm trying to put it into a word picture for you. If China's chips could only build like an old Walkman or something, Russia's chips can make a toaster, perhaps. I mean, Russia's ability to make computer chips is in the 90 nanometer size. Remember, I said that Taiwan is making them in the 4 nanometer size. That's a different planet. They're so far off that the only way they can get chips to build what they need is to set up front companies, have the front companies buy the chips, and then ship them kind of black market style up into Russia. But they can't get the quantity that they need to do what they have to do of good chips. And it's one of the reasons why it's very likely that before the end of the Trump administration, that China is going to be at war with the United States over Taiwan. Taiwanese companies are opening chip factories in the United States. Yes, Arnold, they are. We're trying to help Taiwan diversify out of Taiwan proper, because then if China were to take it over, they're not going to own the most advanced chip makers in the world. They actually, I've read that they have like kill switches on the machines over there that would melt the machines if it looks like China is about to take them over. And China would not be able to rebuild them. So all they would do would be to stop the manufacture of those in China. And by building these high-tech chip factories in the United States, they're able to salvage that, make it possible for us to have use of these. This book I've been reading lately, I just finished it. It's called The End of the World is Just the Beginning by Peter Zeihan. Um, Talks a lot about chips and uh, just how important they are for everything that we do today, and how soon the ability to get high-tech chips is going to be um, very difficult for most countries that are not in the Western Hemisphere. And so moving this stuff into the Western Hemisphere is a very good thing, because the transport is going to break down between the Western and the Eastern Hemisphere, according to Peter Zeihan. You should go read that book. It's a good book. So what equipment did the U.S. just give to Taiwan? I believe we're giving them missile technology to shoot down missiles. That's the last I saw. Amir said Russia is shipping air defense systems from Syria to Libya. Yeah, I saw that. And everybody, they and Iran both are shipping things to the Sudan, because Sudan is the new proxy that they're going to try to use to fight against the West. Not sure how well that will work. I should probably go to Sudan and check that out, or at least South Sudan. If you would like to see me go to South Sudan, let me change this camera back. I'm interested to know if you would like me to go to South Sudan. Uh, I've I've not been to Sudan before. I've been to Ethiopia near the border, but I have not been into Sudan. I'm thinking about going this coming year. I think Sudan would be a very interesting story for sure. Uh, PS 83 name Israel not in remembrance of Confederacy against. Okay, Jeff. Yeah, Russian. Well, not just Russia, Clark. Clark says sort of Russia's version of surrounding Israel using different proxies and nations. Uh, yes, but it's not just Israel. Iran is looking for new proxies as well, because they just lost all their proxies. Um, okay. Yeah, you're back behind. Diane says, yes, go to South Sudan. Okay. Yeah, be an interesting trip for sure. So that's where I want to end it today. I wanted to ask you, CBN basically gives me a lot of leeway to choose the places that I go to report from. And so this coming year, I'm right now in the process of trying to make some tentative plans. We have plans to go to Iwo Jima in March for the 80th anniversary of the battle. And that's going to be amazing. We're also going to go to Tinian while we're over there, and to Guam on that trip, Saipan, that sort of thing. But where would you like to see me go in 2025? If you could send me anywhere on the earth to do some reporting, uh, I'm sure I will be back in Israel a couple times. I'm sure that there will, be reporting on the inauguration on the 20th of January for sure. I'll be in the chat. That if you don't follow me on my Hot Zone channel, please go over to YouTube and go to the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton. This is YouTube. Whoop, looks like uh, yeah, follow my YouTube channel, but also go to chuckholton.com. And I put a lot of videos up over there that I can't put on YouTube because it would get us, demonetized. But Sean says, go to Antarctica. That'd be cool. Jamaica, well, they need to have a war there for me to go to Jamaica. South Korea, been there, done that. I might go to South Korea because Russia is pushing North Korea to attack South Korea. And so I may go do some reporting on that. We'll see. And where else would you like to see me go? Anybody? New Guinea? How about just Guyana? I don't know what's in New Guinea, but Guyana is under threat from Venezuela. Topi says Zihan is clueless in many areas, but still pretends to know them. I would venture to say Zihan has forgotten more about global geopolitics than you might know, Topi, and I might know. If you, I mean, suffice it to say, Peter Zihan gets paid lots and lots of money to go around the world and to lecture, not just at uh, universities, but to companies and to even governments about global geopolitics. And although I don't agree with him on everything, uh, I I do believe that I've not found a lot of things that he is wrong on. He hasn't been right on everything. Yeah, we got a problem with audio. How about this? Probably just because the bit rate is getting low on the internet here. Looks like the internet is kind of coming and going a little bit. But yeah, I need some of that Jordan River water. The other thing I wanted to point out is how might Russia negotiate with its nuclear weapons? Well, those things only work as deterrent, so it'll keep anybody from attacking Jordan. That's for sure. Uh, can I do something on the new mega prisons in Venezuela? No, those aren't in Venezuela. They're in El Salvador. And yes, I would love to go do some reporting on the mega prisons in El Salvador. So that's a very good one. Thank you. Syria, Damascus. I probably will go to Syria in January, maybe even. Um, I wanted to point out my books you can get. I just came out with this book called Death of Civilization, and you can get this over at chuckholton.com by becoming a supporter over there, or just go get it on Amazon now. And I also came out with a little coffee table book of my photographs, my best photographs from 2024. And there's a lot of great pictures and stories of everything we did this year in this book. So uh, I recommend you go to chuckholton.com to get that one because that's the only place right now you can get it. You can go to Blurb perhaps and get it. Um, I don't have that link though, but the link is over at chuckholton.com. So if you want to get that book, you can get it there. Uh, Also, I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you to donate to CBN.com. If you go to CBN, they do a lot to help a lot of people around the world. And your generosity is what keeps CBN running. They don't make a lot of money on other things. They make their money from little old ladies sending their $25 a month or whatever. And believe me, they are very careful with that money. They don't spend it wantonly like some networks that I've worked for in the past. So if you go to cbn.com, you can see the link there in the chat, securegiving.cbn.com. I recommend that you would do that. And so that's all I've got for today. Thank you very much for watching. I want to say a prayer before we go and just pray for all of you out there tonight. Okay? Lord God, I come to you right now and I just pray for all those who are watching or listening to this video. I pray that you would watch over them and guide them. We know, Lord, that every one of us is fighting a battle. You know all of our battles. And I just pray that people would grow in their faith and would be able to hand those battles over to you and trust you for whatever they're facing. Lord, there's so much conflict and um, tragedy all around us on planet Earth. And we beg you to come quickly, Lord Jesus. But we also ask, Lord, that you would thwart the plans of evil men wherever they are, and that you would make yourself known to the people who are hurting in all of those war zones and conflict areas that we've talked about tonight. There's so many people around the world who need you, Lord, and we need you. So come quickly. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thank you very much for watching. And I appreciate all of you. And we'll see you again next time. Take care.